Okay, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Pei Beis, Bava Basra 82. Today's daf is dedicated to a shmira for the chayalim, matzah for the shvuyim, and a yeshua for Am Yisrael. In this Eis Sarah, the daf yomi will start for Pei Beis Amid Aleph. We'll start it on Pei Beis, 5 lines from the top. That our Mishnah had said, if you sold a person 2 trees, the Chachamim said, then they don't get the land underneath it, they just get the trees. And if the trees branches grow, well, yeshafeh. Now you can't. The person who sold it is not allowed to cut off the branches, because the implication was he intended the person to be able to have his branches go over his field, because that's how he sold it to him. And then it said in the next line in the Mishnah, it said, whatever comes up from the trunk belongs to the person who bought it. And whatever comes up from the roots, belongs to the person who sold the ground. Meaning whatever comes up from the above ground belongs to the person who owns the tree. Whatever comes up from the below ground belongs to the person who sold it, who has the land. So it says the Gemara, what does it mean, whatever comes up from the Geza? Nowadays, Geza is what they also call Gaza in Arabic. So he says, what comes up from the Geza? What does it mean? What's considered to come from the trunk? What's considered to come from the roots? So it says, Rabbi Yochanan, today's daf is dedicated for Shmir, for the Chayyim, and Atzal, for the Shvuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Sharoa Pnei Chama, whatever can see the face of the sun, Zeu Menageza, that's considered to come from the trunk, and therefore, whatever shoots forth and it's above ground, that's considered to be the trunk, and therefore that belongs to the person who bought it. V'sheino Roa Pnei Chama, whatever cannot see the face of the sun, Zeu Menasharash, and that's considered to come from the roots, and that belongs to the person who sold it. So the Gemara says, but wait 1 second. How can we say whatever is above ground belongs to the person who owns the trunk, i.e. the person who bought the tree, but not the land? We have to, why aren't we concerned? So this is how Rashbam explains it. Since he said that the trunk and everything that sees the face of the sun belongs to the person who bought it, even if it's right next to the ground, it belongs to the owner of the tree. If that's the case, how could the rabbis have instituted something which was going to cause the seller to lose money? Because sometimes he'll have one tree amongst a field of his friend, and then the Rabbanan will say that it's coming out from the trunk. But then, and since the Rabbanan say whatever comes out of the trunk belongs to him, but what will happen is the ground will come up and cover over the trunk. And so therefore, it'll look like 3 trees somehow. So this could cause a big problem, because it'll be really 1 tree, but because the earth is higher, you'll just see the branches and it'll look like 3 trees. And so therefore, the purchaser will then claim that I get all the land, and the seller will lose, because it's like 3 trees, and if it's 3 trees, you purchase the land. And the Rabbanan should have said that anything that comes out from the trunk, the owner of the tree should cut it down so that he doesn't cause the seller to have a loss. So therefore, the Gemara says, actually, that is what they said. Rav Nachman Yikotes. If he has whatever comes off from the ground that's close to the ground, he should cut down so it cannot be somehow used to trick the seller. And so too Rav Yochanan says the same thing. Rav Nachman Nachpina, and Rav Nachman says a statement which the Gemara views as somewhat opaque. We have a principle, Dekel Ein Lo Geza. A palm tree literally means a palm tree has no trunk. So Rav Zila Meimar, what does this statement mean? So Rav Zvid thought to say that this possibly means, Rav Zvid possibly thought to say, Ein Lo Gezel about Dekel, that the owner of the palm tree doesn't get the trunk. Why? Meaning to say, Ein Lo Ayotzi Min look at Rashbam, Ein Lo Ayotzi Min Gezel, whatever comes out of the trunk doesn't belong to the owner of the palm tree. because since the palm tree is meant to basically, when the tree dries up, to be dug up, means because he has not purchased the real estate, and so therefore he doesn't get whatever shoots out from the trunk. The kivin do milk bar since it's meant to be dug up after the palm tree dies, he already has given up on it. Look at Rashba. The owner of the palm tree has given up on anything that's going to come shoot forth from it, because he's of the position that the palm tree will dry up quickly, and then he won't have anything coming out. Because it's not similar to other trees that if it dries up, you could just cut it off the top and it will regenerate. But the palm tree is different, and once it dries up, you can't fix it. So therefore, he's already lost hope on anything coming out, and he never intended to purchase the shoots. That's what the chiddush of Rav Nachman is. So the Gemara says, "Maske for Rav Papa v'akonesh neilanos." So milchbar mishrash kaimi. But Rav Papa says, "What are you talking about? Somebody buys 2 trees. Obviously, it's meant when it dries up, he's not going to be able to redig it. V'gatani dieshlo geza. In that case, since the case of the two trees includes even the palm trees in our Mishnah, so and there it says he gets the shoots. So how can you say that in the case of a palm tree, he doesn't get the shoots? So therefore, Rav Papa has to say, Amar Rav Papa elo gezel about dekel, b'fisha ein motzi geza. Or so Rav Papa says, no, the trunk doesn't belong to the owner of the palm tree because the fisha ein motzi gaza. So what does that mean? Rav Papa says, don't say that the reason is because he never expected it, because he's expecting to dig it up, but rather it means, just like you said, he doesn't get the shoots, but why not? You have the same conclusion, but a different reason. The fisha ein motzi gaza. The palm trees never shoots out any shoots. That's the reason. Meaning to say, it only comes out from the top, but not from the bottom. Gemara says, "Or Rav Zvid kasha mas nisin." But what about Rav Zvid's answer? So he says, no. The answer is the zabon chamesh shanim. So the answer is that our Mishnah is talking about a case where he bought the trees and he gave him the land for 5 years. It means that even if the tree will die during these years, he can come back and plant another tree in its place. So our Mishnah is talking about a different scenario. So now we're up to the next line in our Mishnah, that if you bought 3 trees, then it's like you bought a field of trees and you get the land in between them. So the Gemara asks, Vikama, how much land do you buy along with it? So the Gemara says, Amar Chia Bar Abba, Amar Yochanan, Areze Kona Tachtean Ubeinean V'chutzalaen Kimelo Oro Vesaro. So Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says, in the name of Yochanan, he's bought underneath them. If you bought 3 trees, you bought what's underneath the trees, you bought what's between the trees, and outside of that, you bought the space that's necessary for a person to pick. The case is necessary for a person to stand there picking his fruit. So Maskefo Rabbi Yoazar Hash the Derech, but didn't we rule that if you sold your land, you basically sold it, and like we said, you no longer have an easement to get to your field. He didn't sell, didn't we say that it's just the opposite? If we sold the person the fields, then he didn't sell to him an easement, but rather he has to fly in the air to get there or buy an easement. That's like the Chachamim. We learn like the sages that you sell with a stingy eye. So generally speaking, when a person sells, he is sold with a stingy eye, and he doesn't give you an easement or of a soye. So even a greater chiddush would be to say that he gave him a place to pick his fruit, which is not even necessary. And so now you're saying that he gave him the right to have a picker standing there, which is even beyond an easement. So Amar Rabbi Zera. So therefore, Rabbi Lazar is challenging this point. So Rabbi Zera says, "Midiver Rabbeinu," from Rabbi Lazar's position, we learn no much shlosha hu de ilo derech If he sold him 3 trees, then the purchaser doesn't have an easement. But if he sold him 2 trees, because he has no land whatsoever, then he would have an easement. That only if he sold him 3 trees did the purchaser not get an easement. But if he sold him 2, then he could say, "Listen, I'm on your land. Of course, I'm entitled to get there. Why else do you think I bought them?" So that's what Rabbi Zera says. From Rabbi Lazar's position, we're saying that if you sold 3 trees, you didn't sell the guy an easement, but if you sold him 2 trees, you did. So Amalei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Rava Lema Rabbi Lazar Leitzlei Deshmuel Rabbi. So do you want to say that Rabbi Lazar is not like this is Rabbi Lazar Ben Badas the Amora? Do you want to say that Rabbi Lazar is not like his Rabbi Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel? Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Mocher Bayin Yafim Mocher. So again, we had a dispute between the Rabbanan. Rabbanan say when you sell something, you sell with a stingy eye, you sell as little as possible. And Rabbi Akiva said you sold a Bayin Yafa with a generous eye. So Rabbi Lazar here is saying that if you sold 3 trees, you didn't sell an easement. That means he's ruling like the Rabbanan, you sold with a stingy eye, not like Rabbi Akiva who says you would have sold an easement. So you want to say that Rabbi Lazar, the Amora, Rabbi Lazar Ben Badas, does not paskin like his Rabbi Shmuel, who paskins like Rabbi Akiva, who sells with a generous eye. So Rava says from Nachman Bar Yitzchak, no, we could say that Rabbi Lazar really does hold like Shmuel, that you sell with him ayin yafa. That, and therefore he holds like Rabbi Akiva. But nevertheless, in this case, we don't say that he sold within an easement. Why? Because our Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Akiva, but like the Chachamim. Our Mishnah about the trees can only be like the Chachamim that you sell with a stingy eye, and so therefore it's difficult. And because according to the Mishnah, he has not purchased a path, and so therefore. And so how do we know that our Mishnah is like the Rabbanan that you sold with a stingy eye? Midiktani, from the fact that it says in our Mishnah, Higdilo, that if the branches began to grow, Yeshafa, that the seller can trim them. And if you want to say that this is the position of Rabbi Akiva, that you sold with a stingy eye, why can the seller, if you say this is the position of Rabbi Akiva, you sold with a generous eye, why can the seller trim them? He sold him the right for his branches so our Mishnah says if you sold 3 trees and then they start to grow, the seller can trim them. But if you say like Rabbi Akiva sold with a generous eye, you shouldn't be able to trim them. So it must be our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Akiva. And so therefore he's challenging him about the picker. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says to Rabba, no, Amar Damar Rabbi Akiva, maybe he does rule like Rabbi Akiva, who says you sell with a generous eye. But when does Rabbi Akiva say you sell with a generous eye? Shem Begavi Bor Vedus, by cisterns and reservoirs. Because since the cisterns and the reservoirs are not ruining the land. And so therefore, he would sell with a generous eye and give him the easement around it. But maybe by a tree, then the seller, maybe he's not going to give him an easement there, because sometimes that to allow the branches to go into his field. And so therefore he's going to lose even more of his field. By a cistern will give him an easement, but here he's going to let the branches go into his field and lose his field. Milo Modi Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, isn't it proof? Doesn't Rabbi Akiva admit that if his tree is going into the field of his friend, that if we have a case where the tree grows into the field of his friend, that under those circumstances, the owner of the field is allowed to cut the branches that are preventing him from plowing, and for a full plow, meaning to say the height that he needs to be able to plow without his goad hitting the branches above him. And so we would say the same thing by somebody who sold trees with the real estate to his friend, that since the trees are going to go into the domain of the purchaser, it's like the it's like the branches are in the courtyard of his friend, and he can cut them down. And so, therefore, we could say that the second clause of the Mishnah is even following Rabbi Akiva, who says, generally speaking, you're mocher bayin yafa, but in this case, you're losing your land. And so, therefore, Rabbi Eliezer does not follow his Rabbi Shmuel, but he rules like the Chachamim. And so, therefore, it's a question of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the purchaser also gets the oro v'salo. So the Gemara says, let's bring a proof for Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Tanya Kavase to Rabbi Chia bar Abba that it says, it says if you purchase 3 lands, you bought the land underneath them, around them, and also the basket, the place to stand and pick. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, Osan Oro Vasolo, this picker's place that's outside the orchard that the purchaser bought, Mizoran, does the purchaser plant the seeds there, or does the owner of the field say that be the one to sow them? They could say, I only gave you this field to collect the fruits, and so therefore the seller is allowed to sow there. And when it comes to collect the fruits, the owner of the trees will trample the seeds. Amrulei tinisua hachitzon zoreh esadel. So we learned this law in the Mishnah coming up on 99 with respect to a person who has a garden inside the garden of his friend, and the one who's on the outside wants to give the inner path an easement. Hachitzon zoreh esaderach. The external one sows the path, meaning to say, he only gave him the easement to pass, but not to sow. And so therefore, also in our case, also there the only reason why he gave him this outer area is to collect the fruits. But the owner of the field can sow the ground and not the purchaser. So Amrulei midami. So he says the 2 cases are not the same. Hasam leisleip seidolokech. There in that case, in the Mishnah with respect to the 2 gardens, the purchaser does not lose anything when the outer one sows the area around the path, because he's able to walk on the seeds of Ohacha Islip Seidadolkech. But in this case, the purchaser loses something. To Amarei Kamitanfi Pera, because the owner of the trees would say to the owner of the field, the fruits are going to fall on the seeds and they're going to get ruined because of the manure that you put down for the seeds. Halodami Olaseifa. This is actually more similar to the next clause, where it says that neither one can sow it. And so therefore, here also we should say neither one should be able to sow it in that case. And the Gemara says, let's bring a proof for Abaye. So Tanya Kavas Abaye. The bride says explicitly, since both of them have claims to it, neither one can sow it. So now the Gemara says, what's the reason why the purchaser who purchases 3 trees has acquired the field in between them? Because these 3 trees are considered a field of trees. And so therefore the assumption is, the assumption is that he acquired it with the real estate underneath them. But now the Gemara is going to clarify, what's the distance between the trees of one tree to another that is going to be considered like a field of trees? Like what if it's too close, it's no good. If it's too far, it's no good. So Kamaye Benayan, what's the difference? I'm Rav Yosef, I'm Rav Yehuda, I'm Rav Shmuel, May Arba Amos Va'ad Shmona, meaning to say from 4 to 8 amos. The distance between each tree can be between 4 to 8 amos, and amos is 1.5 feet. So it's 6 feet to 12 feet. Meaning to say, aside from the thickness of the tree, if it has that difference, then we're going to say they come together. If it's farther than that, they're too far apart. If it's less than that, they're too close together. Rava Amar Rav Nachman Shmuel Mishmona Vad Sheshes, he says from 8 until 16. Amar Abau Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says 4 to 8, and Rava says in the name of Rav Nachman Shmuel says from 8 to 16. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, "Utiflo gawei to Rav Nachman. Don't argue with Rav Nachman, who says in the name of Shmuel that until 16 amos they could combined. It's not masnisi kavase because we have a price because we went in the Mishnah like in Masechus Chaim. And this comes to the laws of what's considered a vineyard versus a grapevine. A grapevine, you can plant the seeds. There's a prohibition we saw in yesterday's parasha about kulaya karam, that you're not allowed to plant two seeds in a vineyard. But there's a definition of a vineyard and a grapevine. You can't plant within one tefach of a simple. So we have to see what the halacha is here. It says in the Mishnah as follows. In Kilayim, it says, let's say you have your vineyard and it's planted 16 rows by 16 rows. And in each row, between each row, there's a gap of 16 amos. Mutar lavi zero asham. You're allowed to sow there because they're not going to be considered like they're a vineyard. But if there would be between the rows less than 16 amos, you wouldn't be able to plant in between the seeds because it's going to be considered like a vineyard, and that's kilayim. So and Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says, there was an incident in Salmon. One person planted his vineyard 16 amos by 16 amos. Between each row, there was a gap of 16 amos. And what he would do is he would take the branches of the two rows and throw them onto one side, meaning to say, if the branches were from east to west, he would take at the gap of the north and turn it to the south. And Vizora Esanir, and then he would plow the whole field, meaning to say between the two rows where he would take, there was a gap of 16 amos. So if he wouldn't have turned them over, it would have been less than 16 amos. So it would be considered like a vineyard that he can't plant there. So okay, this is really tomorrow's daf. So we'll get into tomorrow's daf, but you were seeing that the technique he was doing to make it less, to make it not considered an actual vineyard, and to make it less than 16 amos. So we'll pick up that up tomorrow from this point of basically what's the gap between the trees that's going to make it a state Elon, and we're trying to learn out from a vineyard that it's 16 amos. So we'll pick that up in tomorrow's daf. Yashikol to everybody. Any questions? Happy to address.